your S1 biology test, Planet Earth. So for the first question, it asked you, what does biodiversity mean? So biodiversity is the number of different plants or animals in a particular place. So it's all the different types of organisms in a place. So it might be that an area has millions and millions and millions of grass plants, but it's less biodiverse than a small garden that has tons of different types of plants and animals in it. So it's a number of different types of organism. For 1B, biologists are interested in habitats. What is a habitat? It's a place where an animal lives. So it's like the animal's house or its home. So I ask you to think of an animal or plant that you might find at Loch Leven. So you can see the answer scheme for this one is pretty vague. Any appropriate plant or animal that you might find at Loch Leven. So if you said a zebra or a jellyfish, you obviously wouldn't get it right. But if you said a deer or a grass or reeds or even fungi like mushrooms, you'd be right. You get a mark for any appropriate one for that. For the next bit, it's a bit more tricky. It asks for an adaptation that that plant or animal has developed to survive. So it must link the adaptation to a reason. For example, if you said deer for the first one, you might say that they have eyes on the sides of their heads, and that allows them a better view around them to see predators. We might have talked about grass being really, really difficult to cut and get rid of. So if you cut grass all the way down to the ground, it'll grow back just as well. And that is a good adaptation to allow it to survive grazing. So here is an item that we use for sampling organisms. And most of you hopefully know that that item is called a quadrat. You wouldn't use it to sample things like ladybirds because they can fly away from the quadrat. So it's better to use a quadrat for things that don't move, so plants and fungi. Very good. Or things that move very, very slowly. So it's reasonable to assume that even though a slug or a snail is able to move, that you could put it in a quadrat, or put a quadrat on it, more likely, and you'd be able to count it before it moved out of the way. If you tried this on a house cat, for example, it would probably get out from under the quadrat before you could count. For number 4, I gave you results in a table showing the abundance of all the different plants found using the quadrat in question 6. They laid it randomly in a woodland and they found 7 bluebells, 4 wood sorrel, 2 bracken and 3 primroses. So the abundance is the number of each of these they found. The plant that was most common is the one that has the highest number, so that is the bluebell. The number of different species of plants that were found, they're just asking how many different types of plants you found. So the answer is 4. Got bluebells, wood sorrel, bracken and primrose. Why is it better to take more than one reading in an area? So if you repeat your sample, it makes the results more reliable the more quadrats you throw. So it's a better idea of all the organisms living in a woodland. So if you imagine you walk into the middle of a very, very large wood and you throw one quadrat down, it might be that the part of the wood you've gone to has no bluebells at all, but that's just a bit of an anomaly. That's a bit of an error, really. And then actually, if you'd thrown 1,000 quadrats in that wood, you might find that there's bluebells everywhere. It just so happens the small quadrat you threw happened to miss them. So the more you throw, the more likely you are to get a representative sample of that area. We're making a paired statement key. This is quite a tricky skill, actually. It's one that we also assess at National 5, so don't worry if you find it a bit tricky, of some of the invertebrates you find around Loch Leven. So there's mayfly nymphs, stonefly nymphs, flying larvae, or flatworms. So again, this could easily be exactly this question that you would see at National 5. So it gives you some information. So you can see mayfly nymphs have 3 tails, stonefly nymphs have 2, whereas fly larvae and flatworms have none. So for this first question here, you could ask something to split the species into different groups. So has tails, has no tails. At this point, we're not worried about the number of tails. So if question 1 was has a tail or doesn't have a tail, to identify the organisms, you could say has a tail, go to question 2. Has no tail, go to question 3. So has a tail would be mayfly and stonefly nymphs. So to find out which one you were looking at, you would have to go to question 2. Has 3 tails or has 2 tails? So if you'd never seen a mayfly nymph before, which could easily be possible, you could look at it and go, well, it's got at least 1 tail. It's got 3 tails. That's a mayfly nymph. And similarly with the stonefly nymph, you could do the same thing and identify it using just these first 2 questions. But if you were looking at, for example, a flatworm, you might say, well, it doesn't have a tail, so I don't know if I'm looking at a fly larvae or a flatworm. So you go to question 3, and for this one, jointed legs isn't very useful. But does it have a flat body? It says here that fly larvae do not have a flat body, but flatworms, funnily enough, do. So just using those 2 bits of information, you could identify them. It's also possible that maybe you didn't use number of tails and flat body, that maybe you've used jointed legs. For the first question, it could be something like, does it have has jointed legs or does not have jointed legs? So if it was yes, again, you would end up with the same questions 2 and 3 as if you'd used tails, because these 2 have tails and they also have jointed legs, and these 2 don't have tails and have no jointed legs. So there's lots of different ways you could do it. If your key works and it's in roughly this format where you've got different questions like this, and they're paired, and there's go to 2, go to 3, and some answers, then you would get the 3 marks. So answers should have no more than 3 pairs, so no more than 3 questions. You would remove a mark if there's a single mistake, so it's very easy to make a silly mistake making paired statement keys. I do it all the time. But you still get 2 marks if the rest of it's okay. If it's not a brilliant paired statement key, but it kind of does the job, you can maybe have 1 mark. So number 6, the source of all energy for living things, it comes from the sun. So even a wolf that eats a rabbit, the rabbit eats grass, and the grass gets energy from the sun. So when you come right back down to it, everything gets its energy in the end from the sun. Which word completes the blank in this photosynthesis equation? So carbon dioxide plus water gives you glucose plus oxygen. So we, in biology, we say cow-we go. So CO from the cow. So CO2 plus water gives you the cow. E, we say energy, because remember the light energy from the sun is coming in, and then go. So cow, E, go. For C, arrange these in the correct order. So when you're starch testing, you boil the leaf to break down some of the waxy elements in cell walls. You boil it in alcohol. You have to make sure you switch off the Bunsen burner before you get the alcohol out, because it's very flammable and burns with a clear flame. You would then add iodine solution. This reacts with the starch, and if it goes a blue-blacky color, it means that there was starch. Plants tend to make starch from glucose, so if photosynthesis happened, you should see some starch. Here we go, we're getting there. Below is a table showing how photosynthesis is affected by changing the light intensity. So that's the amount or the strength of the light. The volume of oxygen produced in 5 minutes shows us the rate of photosynthesis, so how quickly photosynthesis is happening. That's because, if you think about it, if you give the plant a certain amount of carbon dioxide and water and then absolutely hammer it with everything it needs, all the light it could possibly want, it'll get rid of that carbon dioxide and water really, really quick and make oxygen nice and quickly. So they gave it 10 units of light. You don't need to know what the units of lights are. Things like lux is a good unit. If you give it 10, in a 5-minute period, it only makes 4 centimeters cubed or 4 mils of oxygen. But if you give it 20, it can make twice as much. 8, 30, you get 12, 40, you get 16, and 50, you get 16. So clearly we've hit a kind of a highest possible speed when you get to 40. 41, 42, 43, up to 50 doesn't seem to make much of a difference. What happens to the volume of oxygen when the light intensity is increased? It increases, nice and simple. What would you expect the volume of oxygen to be when the light intensity is 35? It's going to be somewhere between about 12 and 16. 35 is halfway between 30 and 40. So you're expecting a number halfway between 12 and 16. So that's a gap of 4. So halfway, a gap of 2, which is 14. Draw a line graph showing how light intensity affects the volume of oxygen produced. using the graph paper. So obviously you've done this digitally, potentially, so you didn't have graph paper. So if you've had a go, very well done. I used Microsoft Excel to make myself a little graph, so we'll have a look at where you get the marks for that. It's 3 marks up for grabs. So let's see if I get the marks. Have I put the correct labels in? So you were given light intensity already, so you don't get any points for that. But volume of oxygen produced in 5 minutes. The way you know exactly what to write on the Y and the X axis is that your label should perfectly match your table. So your X axis, almost always, the label is the first column in your table. And your Y axis, what we would call the dependent variable, when you move up to school, is always this. So just write exactly what is in that column, and that is your label. So we would get the marks if we wrote that. Units on axis, we've done that. Points plotted correctly. So let's have a look. 10 was 4, 20 was 8. Let's see if I got those two right. So 10 was 4, 20 was 8. So all I've done is I've given myself 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've given myself 9 boxes, and I've made each one of them a jump of 2. And by doing that, I could easily plot my results. Appropriate line drawing. Don't penalise for connecting to 0. So we'll come back to that in a second, but let's see. So that looks fine. It's a straight line. It's a straight line. It's a straight line. This little hiccup here isn't great though. So I've deliberately, we'll imagine, put this on to show that that's not good enough, okay? So it has to be a perfectly straight line across at 16 because we have no data to suggest that there would be this little bump. So again, we assume that this line would follow down perfectly to 0 and that at a light intensity of 0, you get no oxygen. But we don't know that from the data. It could be some science that we don't yet understand, means that actually you get 18 centimeters cubed of oxygen at a light intensity of 0. And we can't hold it against you that you don't know that, but you don't have any data at all to put a point in here. So never, what we say, extrapolate, never just guess at what result you would have got. Just plot the points you've been given and join the dots together. And I believe the last question, so second last, third last. So an omnivore is an animal that eats animals and plants. A producer is a term given to an organism that makes its own food. Herbivore, or primary consumer, to be very technical, is the term given to the first consumer in the food chain. Herbivore is better at our level. What do the arrows in the food chain represent? They do not represent what eats what, because a mouse does not eat an owl. That's not how that works. A very fierce mouse and a very weak owl. It shows the flow of energy, because we know that down here, we never draw the sun into a food web or food chain, but down here is the energy from the sun, and it flows to the grain, and to the grass, and to the carrot, and from there it goes to the rabbit, to the fox, or to the grasshopper, to the owl, etc. So it shows the flow of energy through our ecosystem. What would happen to the number of mice in the food web below if the number of owls decreased? So let's have a look. If you get rid of all the owls, the grasshoppers are still going to be eating the grass, still going to be eating the grain, but hey, look, nothing's eating them anymore. So the grasshopper numbers will increase. So they're going to increase as nothing is now eating them. That is the end of our test answers. I hope that made sense. If not, please ask your teacher.